The gun was pressed against Ivy's temple. She couldn't see the man holding it, but she knew his voice, the voice that had haunted her nightmares for 5 years. "Did you really think you could escape me?" Vincent Crane whispered, his breath hot against her ear. Somewhere in the darkness she heard Dominic's voice, calm, deadly, barely containing his rage. "Let her go, Crane. This is between us." "No, Blackwell. This is about what's mine." The gun pressed harder. Ivy felt the cold metal dig into her skin. She couldn't see anything, but she could hear everything: the rain hammering on the warehouse roof, the sound of guns being cocked, Dominic's heavy breathing as he fought to stay in control. "You have 3 seconds, Vincent said. "Drop your weapon, or I paint the floor with her brains." 1. How did it come to this? How did a blind woman abandoned in an alley end up at the center of Chicago's bloodiest mafia war? 2. It started 8 weeks ago, on a merciless October night, when Dominic Blackwell made a choice that would change everything. Let me take you back to where it all began. 8 weeks before that fateful night, Chicago's rain came down as though the sky itself were mourning, weeping for the lost souls who drifted through this city. Dominic Blackwell sat in the back seat of an armored Maybach, watching the streams of water slide down the window like blood trails in the dark. He had just finished a brutal meeting, the kind no one ever wanted to attend, and no one was allowed to leave until the problem had been dealt with. The traitor had received the lesson he deserved. Dominic had not needed to lift a hand. All it took was a single nod, and everything was arranged, cleanly, efficiently, without hesitation. That was power. That was the life of the most powerful kingpin in Chicago. But tonight, even power could not erase the exhaustion that was gnawing at him cell by cell, seeping into his bones and settling there. Marcus sat in the front seat, silent as always, knowing his boss did not want conversation right now. The car glided through empty streets, smooth as a whisper, carrying Dominic back toward the North Shore estate where Luna was waiting. At the thought of the little girl, Dominic let out a quiet sigh without meaning to. By now she was probably making Dot read her the 5th fairy tale again. Luna was like that. She never surrendered to sleep until she had heard every story about princesses and princes, every last one. She was only 8 years old, yet she had already lost both her father and her mother. 3 years earlier, Daniel, Dominic's younger brother, had died in Dominic's arms. 3 years of raising his niece alone. 3 years of returning to a vast house only to face a hollowness nothing could fill. Dominic had everything people envied: money, power, the fear of his enemies. But he had no one to share dinner with, no one to ask how his day had been, no one waiting for him except Luna and Dot. Sometimes Dominic wondered whether he was any different from the walking dead in this city. The car turned onto the road that led toward the borderland, where Dominic's territory touched the territory of the Crane gang. Marcus grew a little tenser, his hand settling on the gun at his hip by instinct. This was ground no one wanted to linger on for long. And then the headlights swept across a dark alley, and Dominic saw something that made him signal the driver to stop. A small figure was curled up among the trash bins, like a wounded animal searching for somewhere to hide and die. Marcus turned to Dominic, his eyes sharp with warning. "It could be a trap, boss. This is Crane's border." Dominic did not answer. He stared through the curtain of rain and realized it was not a trap. It was a woman, and she was trembling in the cold rain as if she had been there a very long time. A thin dress clung to her body, her hair a tangled mess hiding her face, and she sat there like a forgotten ghost in a city of millions. Something about that image made Dominic's heart, the heart he had believed died long ago, tighten without permission. He opened the car door and stepped out into the rain. Marcus called after him. But Dominic did not stop. He did not know that this choice would drag him into the bloodiest war of his life. He did not know that the woman shivering in that dark alley would change everything he had ever believed. And he knew even less that the heart he thought was dead was about to beat again, fiercer than it had ever been. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from tonight. Drop your location in the comments. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Dominic moved closer, each step steady on the soaked ground. The rain kept pouring without mercy, seeping through his expensive suit, but he did not care. As the distance narrowed, he saw more clearly the woman curled among the garbage, and something in him shifted, sharp and hot, until rage flared in his chest. She wore a fragile dress, torn in many places, the kind that might once have been beautiful but was now nothing but pitiful scraps clinging to her pale skin. She was barefoot, her feet filthy, and she looked as though she had walked a long way through cold streets. But what made Dominic stop short were the bruises scattered across her body, along her arms, her neck, the exposed flesh revealed by the ripped fabric, and her eyes were covered with a strip of black cloth, the kind Dominic had seen far too many times in his life. The mark of victims who had been trafficked, of human beings stripped of even the right to see the world. She was crying, but without sound, only the tremble of her shoulders and tears that blended with the rain, sliding down from beneath that black cloth. Dominic crouched, trying to make his voice as gentle as he could, even though gentleness was not something he practiced. "Can you hear me?" Her reaction tightened his chest like a fist. She jerked in terror, curling in on herself like a hunted animal, her thin hands shielding her face in a desperate, defensive posture. Her voice was hoarse, broken by fear and exhaustion. "Please, don't take me back to him. I'll do anything. I'll be good, I promise." Dominic stood frozen for a beat as the truth slammed into him. She was blind, not only blindfolded, but truly blind. She could not see who he was, could not tell him apart from the man she feared down to the bone. She thought he was one of his people, someone who had left those injuries, someone who had driven her to beg like this. He lowered his voice. Softer, lower, a voice he barely recognized as his own. "I'm not taking you anywhere. I'm not him. Not the man you're talking about." She was still trembling, but the panic seemed to loosen by the smallest degree. Dominic looked down at her wrists and saw the marks of rope, old layered over new, as if she had been bound and rebound countless times over a long stretch of time. Then his gaze caught on her shoulder, where the torn dress exposed a scar that made the blood in his veins feel as if it had turned to ice. The letter C burned into her skin. Dominic knew at once whose mark it was. Vincent Crane, a butcher wearing a businessman's mask, the man at the head of the largest trafficking ring in the Midwest. And he had branded this woman the way you brand cattle. Marcus had followed Dominic to his side, his hand still on his gun, his voice tight. "Boss, this could be a trap. We're in Crane territory." Dominic did not take his eyes off the woman shaking at his feet. "If Crane wants to set a trap for me, he won't use a blind woman who's dying." Without thinking further, Dominic shrugged off his coat and gently settled it over her shoulders. She flinched at the sudden warmth, but she did not pull away anymore, perhaps too drained to fight, perhaps because some instinct told her this man was not like the ones who had hurt her. Then she fainted, her body going limp like a discarded doll. Dominic caught her before she could collapse into a puddle of filthy water, and as he lifted her, he realized she was frighteningly light as an autumn leaf, fragile as if she might shatter if he was not careful. In his arms, she looked like a broken winged angel cast down into hell. Dominic did not understand why his heart was pounding faster than usual, why the anger in him burned so violently when he imagined what had been done to her, why he wanted to protect a complete stranger. He only knew he would not leave her here, not ever. Dominic laid her gently on the back seat of the Maybach, careful as if she were a priceless piece of porcelain that could shatter at any moment. His coat was wrapped around her thin frame, yet she still trembled even in unconsciousness. Her breathing was so faint, her chest rising and falling so lightly, that Dominic had to watch closely, just to be sure she was still alive. Marcus had returned to the driver's seat, started the engine, and pulled them out of that grim alley as fast as he could. No one spoke for the first few minutes. There was only the steady drumming of rain on the roof and the windshield wipers working without pause. Dominic sat beside the stranger, studying her face in the dim wash of streetlights slipping past. Beneath the grime and bruises, she was beautiful in a sorrowful way, as if pain had carved itself into every line and curve. He wondered how old she was, what her name might be, what she had endured in Vincent Crane's hands. Just then, the phone in his pocket vibrated. Dominic took it out and glanced at the screen, a message from an unknown number. He opened it and felt as though someone had poured a bucket of ice water down his spine. A photograph, the face of the woman lying beside him, shot from a distance, on a rainy night, at the exact moment Dominic had found her in the alley. The angle suggested the watcher had been across the street, maybe on a rooftop, or inside a car parked in the dark. Beneath the photo was a line of text that changed everything. "She belongs to Crane. Return her within 48 hours, or we will return her to you in pieces. The clock starts now." Marcus glanced up at the rearview mirror and caught the expression on his boss's face. "What is it, boss?" Dominic held the phone forward so Marcus could see the screen. His most loyal man swore under his breath and tightened his grip on the wheel. "Boss, they're watching. They know everything." Dominic did not answer right away. He looked at the photo again, then turned his eyes to the woman lying motionless beside him. She had been watched even when she was thrown away like trash. Vincent Crane never truly let prey go. He was simply playing some sick game, and now Dominic had stepped into it. "Then they also know I don't take orders from anyone." Dominic's voice was ice, the kind of voice his enemies heard before their endings found them. Marcus drew a slow breath. This could mean war with Crane, boss. War between the two biggest gangs in Chicago. Blood will spill. People will die. The empire you built over 20 years could be shaken to its roots. All for a woman you don't even know the name of. Silence stretched inside the car, broken only by the rain and the woman's weak, fragile breathing. Dominic looked at her, at the bruises, at the strip of black cloth still covering her eyes, at the way her body remained curled even in sleep as if she were trying to flee a nightmare. Then he thought of the sea scar on her shoulder, proof that she had belonged to someone, that she had been owned like an object. Then let the war come. Dominic's voice did not tremble. It was not recklessness, not impulse. It was a decision, cold and final, like every other decision he had ever made. Marcus nodded and did not ask more. He had followed Dominic long enough to know that when his boss decided something, nothing could change it. Double security at the estate. Call Dr. Elena, tell her to come immediately. No one goes in or out without my permission. Dominic issued the orders one after another, his mind already shifting into combat. 48 hours. The countdown had begun. He looked down at the stranger again. The woman he had met less than 10 minutes ago. For her, he was willing to wage war against his most dangerous enemy. For her, he was willing to gamble everything he had. Why? Dominic did not know. He only knew that when he saw that scar, when he heard her begging him not to take her back to him, something inside him had broken apart. He could not hand her over to those demons. He would rather set all of Chicago on fire than let that happen. The Maybach glided through the massive iron gates of the Blackwell estate on the North Shore, a place people whispered about as the impregnable fortress of Chicago's most powerful kingpin. The moment the car stopped at the front steps, Marcus was already on the phone issuing orders, and within minutes the number of guards patrolling the grounds had doubled. Lights snapped on everywhere. Shadows shifted in the dark. Radios crackled without pause. Dominic carried the woman, still unconscious, into the house, and the first person to rush out to meet him was Dot, the housekeeper who had been with the Blackwell family for 30 years. She stopped as if nailed to the floor when she took in the sight before her, her aged eyes widening in shock. Dear God, Dominic, who is she? What happened to this poor girl? Dominic had no time to explain. Call Dr. Elena right now. Tell her it's an emergency. Dot nodded and hurried off to the phone, but her gaze never left the battered woman in Dominic's arms. He carried her up the stairs toward the guest suite on the second floor, a room no one had used since Daniel died. And then a small, soft voice rose from the top of the staircase and made Dominic pause. Uncle Dom? Luna stood there in pink pajamas printed with little rabbits, curls sticking up in every direction, eyes heavy with sleep yet bright with curiosity. The 8-year-old had woken to the commotion and slipped out of her room to see what was happening. Her gaze landed on the woman in Dominic's arms, and instead of fear, those wide eyes lit up like stars. Dot had returned and quickly went to Luna, gathering the child into her arms to take her back to bed. But Luna still could not tear her eyes away from the stranger, whispering loudly enough for Dominic to hear. Is she a princess, Dot? Did Uncle Dom save her from a dragon? Dot glanced at Dominic for a heartbeat, then hugged Luna a little tighter. Something like that, sweetheart. Now let's get you back to bed. Dominic kept moving, but Luna's innocent question echoed in his mind. A princess. A dragon. If this were a fairy tale, then this woman truly was a captive princess. And the dragon's name was Vincent Crane. 20 minutes later, Dr. Elena Vasquez arrived. She had been the Blackwell family's private physician for 10 years, the only person Dominic trusted with sensitive health matters. She turned the guest room into a makeshift clinic and began examining the woman, who still had not woken. Dominic stood outside the door, watching through the narrow gap, tracking the doctor's every movement. Nearly an hour passed before Elena stepped out, her face pale, her eyes holding something Dominic had never seen in this tough, unshakable woman, disgust braided with sorrow. She's been blind since birth. Not from an injury. Severe malnutrition. It looks like she hasn't been properly fed for a very long time, possibly for years. Elena paused, drawing a deep breath as if trying to keep her emotions from breaking loose. The injuries on her body, Dominic, the bruises, cuts, burns, they're a mix of old and new. There are scars that healed years ago, and there are wounds only a few days old. Whoever did this to her didn't do it once, didn't do it for a month. They did it for years. They didn't just hurt her. They destroyed her systematically. Dominic said nothing. He only stood there, his fist clenched so tightly his knuckles blanched white. Through the crack in the door, he saw her on the bed, small and shattered, yet still breathing, still alive after everything that had been done to her. The fury in him did not explode. It froze, turning cold and lethal, like a blizzard waiting for the right moment to level everything in its path. Vincent Crane. The name rang inside Dominic's skull like a death bell, like a blood oath he carved into his own soul. He would pay for every scar on her body, every tear, every night of terror. Dominic would make sure of it. 47 hours left. The clock was still counting down. 300 miles to the east, in a luxury penthouse overlooking the Detroit skyline, Vincent Crane sat in a black leather chair that looked like the throne of a dark king. The room was dressed in expensive paintings and lavish furniture, yet nothing in it felt warm or alive, just like the man who owned it. At 40, Vincent had a kind of handsomeness that made people shiver, features sharp as if carved from cold marble, black hair slicked back to flawless precision, and gray eyes that could freeze anyone bold enough to meet his stare. But the most terrifying thing was his smile, the kind that never reached his eyes, like a mask meant to hide the monster underneath. He was staring at his phone screen, scrolling through the photos that had just come in. Dominic Blackwell carrying Ivy into the North Shore estate, security tightening, a doctor arriving in the night. An underling stood before him, tense, waiting for a reaction. "He didn't give her back, boss." Blackwell kept her. Vincent showed no surprise, no anger. He only gave a small nod, as if this were exactly what he had expected. Of course he kept her. That fool thinks he's a hero. The underling swallowed, trying to keep his voice steady. "What do we do when the 48 hours are up?" Vincent rose and walked to the massive window that looked down on the city glittering with lights. He stood there like a god contemplating his kingdom, hands in his pockets, his posture so relaxed it was frightening. "Nothing, not yet." The underling could not hide his confusion. "Sir?" Vincent turned back, a cold smile spreading across his mouth. Let him think he's won. Let him get comfortable. Let him start to care about her. He paused, savoring every word as if tasting a fine drink. When a man has nothing to lose, he's dangerous. But when he has something precious, he becomes predictable. Vincent looked again at Ivy's photo on his phone, the woman he had owned for 5 years, the woman marked with his brand on her flesh. She was always my biggest investment. Now she'll become my deadliest weapon. He crossed to the liquor cabinet, poured a glass of whiskey, and lifted it to eye level, watching the city lights refract through the amber glow. "Enjoy her while you can, Blackwell. I always take back what belongs to me. Always." The first light of morning slipped through the curtains when Ivy opened her eyes, though for her it meant nothing, because her world had been sealed in darkness forever. The instant awareness returned, panic jerked through her like an electric shock, her heart stuttering wildly as she realized she did not know where she was. The survival instinct sharpened by 5 years of hell snapped into place, and she began using what senses she still had to read the space around her. There was a faint scent of lavender in the air, not the familiar damp rot of the basement where she had been kept. The sheets were soft as clouds against her skin, not cold, unforgiving concrete. Birds sang outside the window, bright and careless, not the screams or the crack of a whip she had learned to wake up to. Everything was different, but different did not mean safe. Ivy had learned that lesson a long time ago. She bolted upright, retreating toward the headboard, her hands sweeping the bed in frantic search of anything she could use as a weapon. Just then, the door opened softly and a voice drifted in, an older woman's voice, gentle and warm like a cup of tea on a bitter winter day. "Oh, you're awake. Don't be afraid, sweetheart. You're safe here." Ivy flinched inward, unbelieving. Safe. She had heard that word too many times. Vincent had told her she was safe too, right before he beat her until she blacked out. "Where am I?" Ivy's voice came out raw, her throat scorched and dry. The woman moved closer, and Ivy could hear her steps on the wooden floor, slow and careful, nothing threatening in them. "You're in Dominic Blackwell's home, on the North Shore. I'm Dot, the family's housekeeper. You were brought here last night. You were badly hurt, but the doctor has taken care of you." Dominic Blackwell. Ivy knew the name. In the underworld Vincent belonged to, Blackwell was a force to be reckoned with, an enemy her husband spoke of with bitter hatred. But why was she here? Why would a mafia boss save her? There had to be a purpose. No one was kind to her without wanting something in return. Before she could ask more, heavy footsteps sounded in the hallway, and Ivy's entire body went rigid. A man's footsteps, powerful, decisive, like Vincent. Her heart rattled, her breathing turned shallow and fast, and she automatically curled into the corner of the bed, hands covering her face in the defensive posture she had taken 1,000 times before. "Please," she whispered before she could stop herself. "Don't hit me." But the footsteps stopped at the doorway, and the voice that came next was nothing like what she had braced herself to face. Low, steady, strong, but not threatening. In fact, there was a softness tucked inside it that she could not understand. "You're safe. No one will hurt you here." Ivy lowered her hands slowly, though she still could not fully relax. "He said that too." At first, before she could finish, her voice broke as dark memories surged up like floodwater. Silence stretched in the room, then the man spoke again, slow and clear. "I'm not him. I don't make promises I can't keep. And I don't hurt women." Ivy swallowed, forcing herself to find her voice again. "Then what do you want from me?" It was the question she had learned to ask. Everything had a price. Every kindness came with conditions. She had lived in the dark long enough to understand that. The man's answer startled her. "Nothing. I just couldn't leave you there." Ivy did not know how to respond. No one had ever said anything like that to her. She still did not completely believe him. 5 years of betrayal had taught her that trust was a luxury she could not afford. But she noticed one thing. For the first time in 5 years, she had dared to ask a question, and she had not been hit for it. Maybe this place was different. Maybe this man was different. Or maybe this was only a more elaborate trap. Either way, she had no choice but to wait and see what would happen. 36 hours remained on the countdown clock she knew nothing about. The second day at the Blackwell estate passed in a strange kind of quiet. But for an 8-year-old girl overflowing with curiosity like Luna, that quiet felt like a form of torture. She had tried her best to be good and do what Dot said, not to ask too many questions about the mysterious woman Uncle Dom had brought home, but her imagination refused to stop moving. A real princess, right there in her house, and she was not allowed to meet her. It was too unfair. So when Dot was busy downstairs in the kitchen preparing lunch, Luna crept up the staircase, her steps as light as a cat's, her heart pounding with excitement and the fear of being caught. She stood in front of the guest room door for a long moment, drew in a deep breath to gather her courage, and then gently pushed the door open and slipped inside. Ivy was sitting on the bed, her back against the headboard, her blank eyes turned toward the window even though she could not see a thing. The moment she heard the door, her body tensed, shoulders locking, fingers tightening on the blanket in a reflex of self-defense. But these footsteps were different, small and soft, as if the person who had entered had very little feet. "Hello, I'm Luna. Are you the princess Uncle Dom saved?" The clear whisper of a child filled the room, and Ivy felt her body loosen a little. A child's voice carried no threat. A child's voice did not yet know how to hurt someone in the ways adults had hurt her. "I'm not a princess," Ivy answered, her voice still rough and weak. "But Uncle Dom carried you like in the movies, and you're really pretty, so you have to be a princess," Luna insisted with the absolute certainty of a child who believed in fairy tales. A deep sadness swelled inside Ivy. Pretty. She could no longer remember what it felt like to be called pretty. For 5 years Vincent had told her she was ugly, useless, disgusting, every day, until she believed it as plain truth. "I'm not pretty. I'm just trash." The words escaped before she could stop them, and she immediately regretted saying something like that to a child. But Luna did not look frightened or confused. She was quiet for a moment, then spoke in a tone so serious it was startling for an 8-year-old. "My mom was trash too. Dad said Mom had a sickness in her heart. But Uncle Dom says people who were thrown away are the strongest people, because they survived." Ivy did not know what to say. She had never thought of herself that way, as someone who survived instead of someone who was simply a victim. "Can you see me?" Luna's voice rose again, this time brimming with curiosity. "No, sweetheart, I can't see anything at all." Ivy admitted it, bracing herself for the pity or fear she knew too well. But Luna asked something completely unexpected. "Then how do you know what's real?" Ivy hesitated, thinking about that simple question that was strangely deep. "I listen, and I touch, and I feel." "That's so cool. Like Daredevil." Luna burst out, delighted, and Ivy found herself smiling, a real smile, for the first time in so long she had almost forgotten what it felt like. No one had ever compared her to a superhero before. Luna began telling her about herself, about how her parents had died 3 years ago, and Uncle Dom had raised her since then, about how much she missed her mother. "My mom used to play the piano. I missed the sound of it so much." The girl's voice dipped, and Ivy could hear the ache of loss inside it, an ache she understood too well. "I used to play piano too," Ivy murmured, and at once she felt a small, warm hand slide into hers. "Really? Can you teach me? Please, please, please?" Luna begged, her voice bright with hope. Ivy did not answer right away. She only sat there, feeling the warmth of that little hand holding hers, and realized something that made her throat tighten. For the first time in 5 years, someone wanted to be close to her without wanting to hurt her. For the first time in 5 years, she was being touched without fear. Maybe this place truly was different. Maybe these people truly were different. 24 hours remained on the countdown clock she still knew nothing about. 48 hours passed, and nothing happened. No attack, no new threatening message, no suspicious shadow circling the estate. Only a complete silence, the kind that sits heavy as the air before a storm and unsettles everyone in the house in different ways. Marcus stood in Dominic's study with his arms folded across his chest, the tension plain on his face as he said, "It's too quiet, boss. Crane never bluffs." He said 48 hours. 48 hours are gone, and there's not a single move. This isn't normal. Dot stood near the door, holding a tray of tea that had gone cold long ago because no one had thought to touch it, and she offered a thread of hope she did not quite believe herself. Maybe he decided she isn't worth starting a war. Dominic stood at the window, looking out over the wide garden washed in early morning mist, and he did not turn when he answered in a low, watchful voice. "He's planning something. I can feel it." Just then, light footsteps sounded in the hallway, and the study door opened. Ivy stood there, one hand braced on the frame to keep her balance, her face pale, yet in her sightless eyes there was something Dominic had not seen before: resolve. She had heard the conversation from the next room, and she knew she had to say this, even though the mere mention of Vincent made her whole body tremble. "He won't give up," Ivy said, her voice shaking but certain. "He never gives up. He's waiting." Dominic turned to look at her, the sharpness in his eyes softening a fraction when he saw her forcing herself to stand when she was clearly still weak. "Waiting for what?" Ivy stepped into the room, each movement slow and careful. "Waiting for you to start caring. Waiting for you to have something to lose. That's when he strikes." She stopped and drew a deep breath as if trying to hold back the fear rising in her chest. "Vincent never plays fair. He waits until you feel safe, until you drop your guard." "And then what?" Dominic asked, his voice dropping lower. Ivy did not answer right away. She only stood there in silence, and that silence said more than any words could have. Dominic looked at her and realized she was shaking, not from cold, but from the horrific memories pushing into her mind, because she knew what Vincent Crane would do. She had lived in his hell for 5 years. She knew how ruthless he could be, how patient, how dangerous when he truly wanted something. The air in the room thickened until it was hard to breathe. Dot set the tea tray down on a table, her hands trembling. Marcus clenched his fists, his gaze cutting toward the window, as if searching for an invisible enemy. Dominic stepped closer to Ivy, not touching her, but close enough for her to feel his presence, and none of them knew that the real threat was not coming from outside the heavily guarded gates at all. It was already inside the estate, because at that very moment one of the new guards, a man Vincent Crane had planted here 2 months ago, stood out in the hallway, quietly watching everything and committing every smallest detail to memory so he could report it to his true master. A week passed after the deadline ended with no sign of Vincent Crane, not a single ripple from him. Ivy had gradually steadied, the wounds on her body beginning to heal, and she could move around her room on her own now. She had even come down to dinner with everyone a few times. But Dominic knew that if he was going to protect his family, he needed to understand the enemy he was facing, and that meant he needed the truth about what had happened to Ivy. That afternoon, in the living room filled with late sunlight filtering through the curtains, Dominic sat across from Ivy, who was on the velvet sofa with Dot beside her, holding her hand in a tight grip. He did not force her. He simply said that anything she could share would help him protect her and Luna better. Ivy was silent for a long time, her slender fingers laced together on her lap, and then she began to speak in a small, even voice, as if she were reading someone else's story. She had been born blind, had never once seen sunlight or the faces of her parents. When she was 6, a car accident took both her mother and father, and she was sent to St. Mary's Orphanage on the outskirts of Detroit. There, within cold walls and among children no one wanted to adopt, Ivy found the piano in the chapel and discovered she had a rare gift. Music became her world, the only thing that made her feel she had any worth in a life where everything seemed stripped away. When she was 14, a wealthy family came to the orphanage and adopted her, but not out of love. They wanted her piano talent, made her perform at parties to impress their friends, forced her to practice until exhaustion, and kept her from going to school like other children. She lived in that house like a decorative object that could play music, fed and given a bed, but never loved. Then Vincent appeared when she was 22. He came to one of the parties where she played and introduced himself after the performance ended. His voice was sweet as honey, filled with the words she had craved her whole life. He said he could see her soul through the way she played. He said she was more beautiful than anyone he had ever met. He promised he would love her forever and free her from the family that was exploiting her. Ivy paused, her voice catching in her throat. For a blind girl who had grown up without being loved, those promises were oxygen to someone drowning. She believed everything he said. After 6 months, Vincent proposed, and she accepted without a moment's hesitation, because she thought this was the real love she had waited for all her life. But on their wedding night, everything changed. Vincent did not touch her, did not kiss her, did nothing a loving husband would do. He only stood there, and she could feel his gaze on her in the dark, a gaze she could not see but could sense like a knife-edged winter wind. Then he spoke, in a voice nothing like the man who had charmed her for 6 months. "You belong to me now, every part of you, forever." Ivy stopped, trembling so violently that Dot had to grip her hand tighter, the old housekeeper's eyes red and flooded with tears. Across from them, Dominic did not say a word, but the sound of wood creaking under his hand revealed how hard he was gripping the armrest. On the surface, he looked calm as still water, but beneath that surface, rage was boiling, waiting for the moment it could break loose. And Ivy had not yet reached the worst part. Ivy drew a deep breath and continued, her voice turning hollow, as if she were trying to pull her soul away from the memories she was forced to speak aloud. After that wedding night, she began to discover the truth about the man she had called her husband. Vincent Crane was not the successful businessman he boasted of being to the outside world. He was the kingpin behind the largest human trafficking operation in the Midwest, a man who controlled hundreds of ruined lives and made his money from their blood and tears. He needed a perfect wife to complete the mask of a respectable entrepreneur, and he chose Ivy not for love, but because she was blind, a woman who could not see the faces of the men who came to meet him, who could not identify anyone, who could not escape because she would not even know where the door was unless she was allowed to. Easy to control, easy to lock away, easy to break. Ivy's life inside Vincent's mansion was a prison without bars. She was cut off completely from the outside world. No phone, no internet, no one to speak to except Vincent and the silent servants he hired to watch her. She was not allowed to leave the house, not allowed to step into the garden, not even allowed to touch the piano in the living room that Vincent placed there on purpose as a kind of psychological torture. Whenever she displeased him, she was beaten, and Vincent's definition of disobedience was wide enough that anything could become an excuse. Speaking too loudly was disobedience. Moving too slowly was disobedience. Crying when she was hit was disobedience. And every day he would stare at her eyes, even though she could not see him, and say words that still echoed in her head like a curse. "No one wants a blind woman. You're useless without me. You should be grateful I keep you at all." Ivy stopped, and Dominic could see she was struggling against tremors she could not control. He wanted to ask about the scar, the letter C he had seen on her shoulder that night, but he did not know how to do it without hurting her more. And in the end he asked anyway, his voice gentler than usual. "Where did the scar on your shoulder come from?" The silence that followed felt suffocating. Then Ivy answered, and her voice no longer shook. It went flat and hardened, as if it had crossed beyond the edge of pain. "He branded me. On our first wedding anniversary. He said it was to remind me who owned me." Dot broke into sobs, the choked crying of a woman who had lived long enough to know how cruel the world could be, and still could not accept cruelty like this. Dominic did not cry. He only sat there, his gaze so cold it could have frozen hell itself. Ivy went on, explaining why she had been thrown into that dark alley on the night Dominic found her. She had accidentally overheard one of Vincent's meetings when he thought she was asleep, and she learned the location where he held trafficking victims before moving them elsewhere. Vincent discovered it, and decided to deal with her in the way he believed was smartest. He told me before he shoved me into the car, "If you're lucky, you'll freeze to death. If not, Blackwell will kill you. Either way, I'll be rid of you." The room sank into a silence heavy as lead. Dominic rose slowly, walked to the window, and turned his back so no one could see his face now. His shoulders were rigid, his hands clenched until his knuckles went white. When he finally spoke, his voice was ice, cold as the death waiting for someone. "Vincent Crane is already dead. He just doesn't know it yet." That night, after Dot brought Ivy back to her room to rest, Dominic called Marcus to his study to plan how they would deal with Vincent Crane. But before the meeting could begin, he realized he needed to do something else first. He needed to talk to Ivy, not to ask her for more of her painful past, but so she would understand why he was so determined to protect her. He found her sitting by the window in the guest room, her face turned toward the moonlight she could not see, as if she were trying to feel its warmth on her skin. Dominic took the chair across from her and sat in silence for a moment before he spoke. And when he finally did, his voice carried something Ivy had never heard from him before, a softness hidden beneath the hard shell. He told her about Daniel, his younger brother, the one who should have inherited the Blackwell Empire instead of him. Daniel had been the better man of the two. With a kind heart the underworld could not harden, someone who always believed that even in the dark you could still do the right thing. 3 years earlier, Daniel had stumbled upon a young woman kidnapped by the Crane gang and decided to save her despite the danger. Vincent Crane found out and ordered both of them killed. That night, Dominic arrived too late. He found Daniel in an abandoned warehouse, drenched in blood, his breath fading fast. Dominic had held his brother in his arms as Daniel drew his last breath. Ivy heard Dominic's voice tremble, something she never thought could happen to a man like him. Before Daniel died, he made Dominic promise him 2 things. First, to take care of Luna. Second, to never let Crane hurt anyone else again. "I failed him once," Dominic said. "I won't fail again." Silence settled between them, but it was the warm kind of silence that comes with understanding, not the cold kind that comes from distance. Ivy spoke at last, her voice light as breath. "I'm sorry. About your brother." Dominic shook his head even though she could not see it. "Don't be. His death gave me a reason to live," Ivy asked, not out of curiosity, but because she wanted to understand the man who had saved her. "A reason for what?" "To destroy everything Vincent Crane has built." Dominic's voice returned to its familiar chill, but this time Ivy understood it was not emptiness. It was a hatred burning quietly under ice. Dominic stood and took a small phone from his pocket, then placed it in Ivy's hand. The phone had only one button, simple enough for her to use without sight. "If you ever feel unsafe, day or night, press this. I'll come, no matter what happens." Ivy held the phone, her fingers trembling as they traced its smooth surface. She did not understand why a stranger would be so good to her, why he would be willing to protect her when the whole world had turned away. "Why are you doing all of this? You don't even know me." Dominic was quiet for a moment, and when he answered, his voice was softer than usual, almost a whisper. "Maybe because someone should have done this for you a long time ago." Ivy felt her eyes burn even though she had been dry of tears for years. She said nothing, only gripped the little phone as if it were a lifeline in a storming sea, and from a shadowed corner of the hallway, someone was quietly watching it all. The new guard, the one Vincent Crane had planted in the Blackwell estate 2 months earlier, pulled out his phone and typed a short message. "She's staying. He's falling for her, waiting for the next instruction." He hit send and vanished back into the darkness, a cold smile flickering across his mouth. 3 weeks had passed since the night Dominic placed that special phone in Ivy's hand, and life inside the Blackwell estate had slowly begun to feel familiar to her in ways she never could have imagined. She had learned the paths from her bedroom to the dining room, from the living room to the small garden behind the house where she liked to sit and feel the sunlight on her skin. Dot cared for her like a mother. Luna visited every day to tell her 1,000 little stories about the world. And Dominic, though he spoke little, carried a presence that gave her a strange, steady sense of safety. But tonight the old nightmares found her again, and Ivy jolted awake at 2 in the morning with her heart racing and sweat soaking her back. She could not fall asleep again, so she decided to go downstairs, moving softly, feeling her way along the staircase in the darkness that, for her, was no different from daylight. When she reached the living room, her hand brushed against something and her heart missed a beat. Smooth wood, keys, a piano. She had known there was one in the living room since her first days here, but she had never dared to come close, afraid of breaking some unspoken rule, the way she had learned to fear rules in Vincent's house. But tonight, in the hush of an estate asleep, her hands seemed to move with a will of their own, trembling as they drifted over keys dusted with a thin, quiet layer. The dust said no one had touched it in a long time. Ivy sat on the bench, her heartbeat so loud she could hear it in the silence. 5 years. 5 years since the last time she had been allowed to touch a piano. Vincent had forbidden her to play, saying music was a luxury someone as useless as her did not deserve. He had taken the one thing that made her feel alive. But now, beneath her fingertips, the keys were waiting. She began to play. The first notes came out shaky, hesitant, as if her hands had to remember how to do something that had been stolen from her for too long. Then, slowly, the melody grew smoother, surer. Clair de Lune by Debussy, the piece her mother used to hum her to sleep when she was small, before she was gone forever in the accident when Ivy was 6. The music poured from Ivy's hands like water held back for years and finally released, carrying all the pain, the loneliness, the fierce longing to live that she had buried for so long. The sound filled the estate in the middle of the night, slipping into every room, waking those who slept. Dot was the first to appear at the top of the stairs, standing there with tears shining in her eyes, both hands over her mouth to hold back a sob. Then Luna came running down in her bunny pajamas, saying nothing, only climbing onto the bench beside Ivy and listening in silence, as if she were being lulled by a beautiful dream. Dominic was last. He stood in the hallway shadows, his shoulder against the wall, not daring to step into the room for fear of breaking the spell of this moment. He only watched Ivy play, watched Luna sitting beside her with her eyes closed and a peaceful smile on her lips, and felt his own heart. The heart he thought had died with Daniel 3 years ago, beating again with a new rhythm. When the final note dissolved into the air, Luna whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "My mom used to play this too, before she went to heaven." Ivy startled, pulling her hands back as if she had done something wrong. "I'm sorry, I didn't know." But before she could say more, Dominic's voice came from the darkness, rougher and softer than Ivy had ever heard it. "Don't apologize. This house hasn't had music in 3 years." He stepped into the dim light spilling in from the window, and when he went on, his voice shook in a way even Marcus had never witnessed. It was beautiful, truly beautiful. From that night on, the piano returned to the Blackwell estate like a lost soul finally finding its way home, and with the music, something else was waking too, quiet and fierce, inside Ivy's heart, and inside the heart of the most powerful mafia boss in Chicago. 6 weeks had passed since the night the piano first sounded through the Blackwell estate, and everything had changed in ways no one could have predicted. Ivy had fully recovered physically, the bruises fading, her body no longer frighteningly thin, a hint of color returning to her cheeks thanks to the steady meals Dot prepared every day. But the greatest change was not in her body, it was in her spirit, the part of her that had been crushed so completely she thought it could never be mended. Every afternoon, Ivy sat at the piano with Luna, teaching her the first notes, patiently guiding each small finger into the right place on the keys, and Luna's laughter would burst out every time she struck the wrong note, and Ivy found herself laughing too, a sound she believed had been taken from her forever in the years of hell. She began helping Dot in the kitchen as well, learning to cook through touch and scent, judging doneness by aroma and texture instead of color. And Dot said Ivy had a natural gift, though Ivy knew it was only because, for the first time in her life, she was allowed to do ordinary things without fearing punishment. Dominic changed too, and that was what startled both Dot and Marcus. The man who had worked late into the night for years, who had eaten dinner alone in his study for 10 years, began coming home earlier. He sat down to dinner with the family, listened to Luna chatter about small school stories, watched Ivy laugh when the girl said something silly, and every night he took his place in the corner of the living room, quietly listening to Ivy play as if it were a ritual he could not live without. Luna noticed the change most of all, and she did not hesitate to say it out loud. "Uncle Dom smiles a lot now, like a real smile. Before, you just did this." She pulled a stern face so exaggerated it was funny. "But now you do this." And she broke into a huge grin, and Ivy did not need sight to know how bright it was. One night the nightmares came for Ivy again. She dreamed of Vincent, of the dark basement, of the beatings and the insults, and she screamed in her sleep, drenched in sweat, her hands clawing at the air as if she were trying to escape someone. Dominic was the first to run into the room, faster than Dot, even though his room was farther away. He sat on the edge of the bed, gently took Ivy's hand, and said her name again and again until she woke. When Ivy realized where she was and who was beside her, she began to shake uncontrollably. Dominic said nothing. He only pulled her into his arms and held her tight, one hand wrapped around her back, the other smoothing her hair, calming her with warmth instead of words, and he did not let go until the trembling stopped completely. "You didn't have to come," Ivy whispered once she could breathe again, her voice raw. "I know. Then why did you come?" Silence. Dominic did not answer, or rather he did not dare, because the answer would change everything, and he did not know if he was ready for that yet. Ivy sat up straighter, and in the darkness she turned toward him with a quiet request. "Can I see you?" "The only way I can." Dominic understood what she meant. He did not speak. He only took her hand and placed it against his face, letting her explore him with her soft fingertips. Ivy traced each line, a broad forehead, a straight nose, high cheekbones, Then her fingers paused on a long scar on his left cheek. She kept moving, feeling the rough shadow of unshaved stubble, the outline of his mouth, the angles of a stubborn, determined chin. "What do you look like?" she asked in a whisper. "Not handsome. Too many scars." Ivy smiled, her first smile after the nightmare. "I like scars. Scars mean you survived." In the darkness of the room, they faced each other, though only one of them could see, and both of them knew that something had changed between them. Something deep and fierce, something that could not be undone. 8 weeks had passed since that fateful rainy night when Dominic found Ivy in the dark alley, and rumors had begun to spread through Chicago's underworld like an uncontrollable wildfire. People whispered that Dominic Blackwell, the coldest boss in the city, was keeping Vincent Crane's ex-wife in his estate, that he had stolen his enemy's property and made it his own. The stories twisted and turned, poisonous and hungry, traveling from one bar to the next, from casino to casino, from shadowed streets to glittering penthouses, and of course they reached Vincent Crane in Detroit. That morning began like any other, with Luna's laughter carrying through the dining room and the scent of fresh coffee drifting in from the kitchen. But when a guard brought in a box that had been left at the gate with no return address, Dominic knew immediately something was wrong. He ordered everyone out of the room before opening it, and when the lid came off, the blood in his veins seemed to freeze. Inside was a photograph. Ivy back when she had still been held inside Vincent's mansion. So thin her ribs stood out beneath pale skin, her body covered in bruises, her eyes empty as if her soul had left long ago. Beneath the photo lay a sheet of paper with a messy scrawl of handwriting. 8 weeks. You've played long enough. Now give back what belongs to me, or I will take something of yours. Starting with the little girl. Dominic read it once, twice, 3 times, and with each reading the fury inside him rose another notch until it broke free. He drove his fist into the desk with all his strength, oak splitting under the blow, blood blooming across his knuckles, and he did not feel the pain. All he felt was pure fear, a fear he had not known since the night Daniel died in his arms. Vincent had aimed at Luna, his girl, the child he had sworn to protect with his life. He called Luna into the room at once, and when she appeared with curious, innocent eyes, he pulled her into his arms and held her tight, tighter than usual, as if someone might snatch her away if he loosened his grip for even a second. "Uncle Dom? You're scaring me." Luna's worried voice broke through him, and Dominic realized he was trembling. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I just need to know you're okay." After he sent Luna to stay with Dot with strict instructions not to leave the room, Dominic summoned Marcus into the study that was now half destroyed. Marcus looked at the broken desk, the blood on his boss's hands, then the photograph and the note, and his face went pale. "He knows about Luna. That changes everything." Dominic nodded, his voice ice even though something inside him was burning with rage. "Double the security. No one in or out without my permission. And find out how he knows so much about what happens inside this house." Marcus understood at once. "You think there's a mole?" Dominic did not answer, but his silence was answer enough. Someone in the estate was working for Vincent Crane. Someone had been watching and reporting every detail back to the enemy. But who, and for how long, those questions would have to wait. Right now there was something else he had to do. A conversation he feared even more than facing Vincent. He had to tell Ivy, but he was afraid. Afraid that the moment she learned she was putting Luna in danger, she would leave to protect them, and Dominic did not know what he would do if she walked away. That night, he stood outside Ivy's room for a long time, his hand clenching and unclenching, stepping forward and then stepping back. Finally, he drew a deep breath and knocked. He knew this conversation would change everything. Again, Ivy was sitting by the window when the knock came, and she knew it was Dominic before he ever spoke. She had learned the sound of his footsteps, the rhythm of his knock, even the way he breathed when he stood outside and waited. But tonight there was something different, a heaviness in the air she could feel even before he stepped into the room. When Dominic told her about the box, about the photograph, about the threat aimed at Luna, Ivy felt the world that had only just begun to gain color for her collapse all over again. She sprang to her feet, trembling, her breath turning quick and shallow as if the air in the room were running out. "I have to go. Tonight. I can't let him hurt Luna because of me." Dominic moved closer, his voice hard as steel. "You're not going anywhere." Ivy stepped back, her sightless eyes empty but her face carved with anguish. "Dominic, you don't understand. Vincent will burn everything you love just to get to me. That's who he is. I lived with him for 5 years. I know what he can do. He won't stop until he gets what he wants, and if he can't have it, he'll destroy it. I can't let Luna get hurt. She's too little. She's already lost enough. Dominic reached for her shoulders, not rough, but firm enough that she could not retreat any farther. Then let him try, Ivy cried, tears streaming down her cheeks without her bothering to wipe them away. Why? Why would you risk everything for me? I'm nobody. I'm just a blind woman you found in the trash. Silence filled the room, holding only their breathing and Ivy's broken sobs. Then Dominic spoke, and his voice was nothing like his usual, not cold, not hard, but soft and unsteady, as if he were exposing the most vulnerable part of his soul. You want to know why? Because you're the first person in years who's made this house feel like a home. Because Luna can laugh again because of you. Because when you play the piano, I forget I'm a monster. He stopped, drew a deep breath as if he had to find courage for what came next. Because I can't imagine waking up and not hearing your voice anymore. Ivy stood there, tears still falling. But no longer from fear, she whispered his name like a prayer. Dominic. He lifted his hand to her face, touching her as gently as if she were a flower he was afraid to bruise. I don't know when it happened. I don't know how. But I need you. Not because you need protecting. Because you make me want to be someone different from the man I am. The silence stretched until it was hard to breathe. Then Ivy slowly raised her hand, closed her fingers around Dominic's hand where it rested on her cheek, and guided it to her chest, right over the place where her heart was hammering as if it might break free of her ribs. Then I'll stay. Not because I'm afraid to leave. Because I need you too. Dominic pulled her into his arms, holding her tight as if she were the most precious thing in the world, something he might lose at any moment. Ivy wrapped her arms around him, pressing her face to his chest, feeling his heart beating hard and steady, answering the frantic rhythm of her own. In the darkness of the room, two broken people found each other in the storm, two lonely souls finally discovering a place they could belong. But neither of them knew the true storm had not arrived yet. It was hiding inside the very house itself, waiting for the right moment to drown them all. A week had passed since the night they confessed what they felt for each other, and life inside the Blackwell estate seemed to have found a new rhythm, even as it remained stained with worry because the threat from Vincent had never truly disappeared. That evening Dominic had to attend an important meeting with his allies in the underworld, a meeting that could not be postponed because it was tied to their plan to deal with the Crane Gang. Before he left, he raised security to the highest level, posted extra men at every entrance and exit, and told Marcus to stay behind and oversee everything. He stopped at Ivy's room, where she sat by the window listening to the night wind. He stepped to her, bent, and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, the warmth of his lips drawing a small smile from her. I'll be back in 3 hours. Stay inside. Ivy nodded, her hand finding his and squeezing lightly, a silent promise. She did not know it would be the last time she felt peace tonight. At 2 a.m, while the entire estate slept, the alarm system suddenly went dead without a single warning siren. The new guard, the one Vincent had planted 2 months earlier, quietly opened the back gate and signaled to 6 dark figures waiting outside. They moved like ghosts through the night, guns fitted with suppressors, footsteps soundless. Dot was the first to sense something wrong. She heard an odd noise from downstairs, and the instinct of a woman who had lived around Mafia violence for decades made her grab the heaviest cast-iron pan in the kitchen and rush out. She did not even have time to shout a warning before one of them struck hard at the back of her head, and she crumpled to the floor unconscious. Luna woke to Dot's brief scream, her heart pounding as she heard strange footsteps and the crash of something breaking downstairs. She did not run to hide. She ran straight to Ivy's room, shoved the door open, and burst in with tears on her face and her whole body shaking. Ivy, bad men are here. They're coming, Ivy snapped, fully awake, the survival instinct honed by 5 years of hell surging through her. She had no time to be afraid, no time to panic. She pulled Luna into her arms and forced her voice steady even though her heart was beating like a war drum. She remembered what Dominic had told her about the estate, about the hidden exits he had prepared for emergencies. Luna, listen to me. There's a secret door in your closet. Do you know where it is? Luna nodded, still crying but fighting to control it. Uncle Dom showed me. For emergencies. Go now. Run to the neighbors and call Uncle Dom. Don't come back, Ivy ordered, her voice harder than Luna had ever heard from her. But what about you? Luna asked, wide-eyed with fear as she looked at the woman she had come to think of as a mother. Ivy held her tight one last time, kissed the top of her head, then gently pushed her toward the door. I'll be okay. I promise. Now go. Luna ran, tears streaming, but her small legs moved fast the way Dominic had taught her. Ivy drew a deep breath, then stepped into the hallway and went the opposite direction from Luna. She could not see, but she could hear the approaching footsteps, could count how many men there were by the different rhythms of their steps. She stopped in the middle of the hall and shouted with all the strength she had, "I'm here. I'm the one you're looking for. Leave the child alone." Then she ran, running away from Luna's room, dragging their attention as far from the girl as she could. She heard boots pounding after her, shouted orders, and she knew her plan was working. Luna found the hidden door in her closet, crawled through the narrow tunnel, and sprinted out into the back garden. She did not stop until she reached the neighbor's house, and the first thing she did was use the smartwatch Dominic had given her to call her uncle. And Ivy, blind and alone, faced 6 armed men inside a dark estate, using her own body as bait to protect a child who was not even hers. Ivy ran through the darkness of the estate she had slowly learned down to every corner over the past 8 weeks, her ears stretched wide for every sound around her. She had counted 6 distinct sets of footsteps when they burst in, and now she could clearly separate 3 men chasing her from the 3 others searching through different rooms. She knew she could not fight them. A blind woman without a weapon against 6 armed men was unthinkable, but she had one advantage they did not. She did not need light to know her way. Dot had taught her everything about this house in the past weeks, from the position of every piece of furniture to which steps on the stairs tended to creak, from the layout of the rooms to where the main breaker box was. Ivy followed the wall, her steps nearly silent, moving toward the breaker panel she knew sat at the end of the first-floor hallway. When her hand found the cold metal box, she did not hesitate. She pulled every switch down at once. The entire estate fell into total darkness, and for the first time tonight, Ivy smiled. Now they were blind too. Curses erupted everywhere, the crash of bodies hitting furniture in the dark, the barked roar of the leader. Find her. She's just a blind one. How hard can it be to catch her? But Ivy had vanished like a ghost. She moved through rooms she had crossed 100 times, slipping past chairs and tables whose exact positions she knew, gliding through doorways she could find even in her sleep. She threw them off by tossing objects one way and running the other, stretching each second, each minute, buying Luna time to get farther away. But in the end, after nearly 10 minutes of flight, they drove her into a corner of the living room where the piano stood silent in the dark. She heard footsteps closing in from every side, and then a familiar voice spoke, and her heart seemed to stop. "Got you." It was the voice of one of the guards, a man whose footsteps she had heard every day, yet she had always felt something was wrong. His steps were too light, too careful, as if he were hiding something. Ivy let out a breath, her voice calm in a way that surprised even her. "It's you. I've known your footsteps were wrong for a long time." The traitor laughed, a cold sound cutting through the darkness. "Clever, for a blind one. Too bad it won't save you." They yanked her arms behind her back and bound her wrists, the rope biting tight enough that she could feel her skin scrape raw. But Ivy did not cry, did not beg, did not shake the way she had for 5 years. Instead, she lifted her chin and spoke with a steadiness like steel. "Tell Vincent one thing for me. Tell him I'm not his property anymore. I never was, and I never will be." She paused, and when she went on, her voice carried a defiance she had never owned before. "And tell him Dominic Blackwell is coming for him." The leader said nothing. He only swung his arm and struck hard against her head. "Shut up." Ivy crumpled to the floor, and the familiar darkness swallowed her consciousness. But before she sank completely, she smiled. Luna was safe. Dominic was on his way, and she, the blind woman Vincent had called useless, had done something she never believed she could do. She had become a protector instead of a victim. Dominic was in the middle of a tense meeting with his allies when the phone in his pocket vibrated, and the moment he saw Luna's name on the screen at 2 a.m, his heart seemed to stop. He stepped outside and heard his niece's voice, shaking and choking through sobs. "Uncle Dom," the bad men took Ivy. "I'm so scared." And Dominic's world collapsed in 3 seconds. He did not waste words. He just rushed to the car and ordered the driver back to the estate as fast as possible, while Marcus called again and again, and he did not answer, because his mind held only one thought spinning like a mad storm. Ivy, Ivy, Ivy. When he reached home, what he saw looked like a nightmare made real. Dot on the kitchen floor with blood at the back of her head, still breathing by sheer mercy. Luna crying in the corner, brought back by a kind neighbor after she ran for help, and Ivy. Ivy was gone. Dominic stood in the ransacked living room, staring at the piano where Ivy used to sit and play every night, and he did not scream, he did not smash anything, he did not do what people do when anger takes them. He simply stood there in absolute silence, his eyes dead, like 2 bottomless black holes. Marcus would later say he had seen Dominic angry many times in his life. But that night it was not anger. It was something else, something far more terrifying. The mole was caught before dawn, grabbed as he tried to slip out of the city. Marcus dragged him in front of Dominic, and Dominic needed only 5 minutes to make him confess everything. No one knows exactly what happened in those 5 minutes, but when the door opened, the mole was missing 3 fingers and ready to say anything if it meant he could die faster. The location was an old warehouse on the south side, buried deep in Crane territory, where Vincent was waiting to finish his sick game. And Dominic gathered 20 men, his most loyal and most ruthless fighters, and said, "We go in, kill them all. Except Crane. He's mine." The raid hit like a storm of blood. Dominic led the charge, the gun in his hand firing without pause, each shot finding its mark with a frightening precision. And he moved through the warehouse like a killing machine. No hesitation, no mercy, not a single second of doubt. Vincent's men dropped one by one, blood staining the cold concrete, and Dominic felt nothing. No fear, no regret, only one purpose driving him forward. Find Ivy, kill Vincent. At last he reached the innermost room, kicked the steel door open, and the sight inside made his blood boil until it felt like it might ignite. Ivy on her knees, hands bound behind her back, and Vincent Crane standing behind her with a gun pressed to her temple. The barrel dug into Ivy's skin. She could not see who held it, but she knew that voice, the voice that had haunted her nightmares for 5 years. "You really thought you could escape me," Vincent whispered, his hot breath against her ear. And from somewhere in the darkness, Ivy heard Dominic's voice, calm and lethal, though she could feel the fury seething beneath that ice. "Let her go, Crane. This is between us." Vincent laughed, a cold sound echoing in the empty room. "No, Blackwell. This is about what belongs to me. We've come back to the beginning, and now the real ending is about to arrive." Vincent pressed the gun harder against Ivy's temple, a venomous smile blooming on his mouth as he watched Dominic facing him with an expression frozen like stone. "Put the gun down, or I pull the trigger. 3, 2. Dominic did not hesitate. He let his weapon fall to the cold concrete, the clatter of metal echoing in a room so silent it felt like it could choke you. Vincent laughed louder, the sound bouncing off the walls like crows in a graveyard. The great Dominic Blackwell, brought to heel for a blind girl. He did not kneel, but to Vincent, surrendering the gun was the same thing. That was when Ivy spoke, her voice shaking yet steady in a way it had never been when she lived under his control. "Vincent, shut up." Vincent snapped, his grip tightening around the gun. But Ivy did not go quiet. "No. For 5 years I was quiet. For 5 years I did everything you told me. I let you destroy me. I let you make me believe I was nothing." Her voice grew stronger with every word, as if she were shedding one invisible chain after another that had bound her for so long. "But I am not nothing. I survived you. I escaped you. And I found people who love me for who I am." I said, "Shut up," Vincent roared, fury igniting in his eyes as he heard her. But Ivy smiled, her first smile since she was taken, and she went on with a calm that felt almost unreal. "And I learned something interesting. In the dark, I can hear everything. Like the sound of Marcus's footsteps moving behind you for the past 30 seconds. Vincent's eyes widened in horror, and he turned his head at the exact moment the gunshot cracked through the air. Marcus hit him in the shoulder from behind, the bullet tearing through muscle and bone, ripping a scream from Vincent as the gun slipped from his hand. Dominic surged forward like a wild animal, driving his fists into Vincent without mercy, each blow carrying the rage he had held down for weeks. Each blow revenge for every scar on Ivy's body, for every tear she had shed, for every night she had endured in hell. Vincent's blood splattered across the concrete, and he collapsed, flattened, too broken to fight back. Dominic drew a knife, the blade flashing in the dim light, ready to end the life of the man who had caused so much suffering. But in that moment, a soft hand touched his arm. Marcus had cut Ivy loose, and she stood beside Dominic now, blind eyes unable to see yet somehow looking straight through him. "Don't. He isn't worth you trading away your soul." Dominic trembled, the knife still raised, the thirst for blood screaming in his veins for vengeance. But Ivy's voice came again, gentle and unshakable. "Let him rot in prison. Let him live and know I'm happy. That is worse than death to him." Dominic looked at Ivy, at her bruised yet beautiful face, at the strength she had fought her way back to, and slowly he lowered the blade. Vincent was bound and turned over to the FBI along with all the evidence of the trafficking ring Dominic had been collecting for 3 years. 47 victims were rescued from Crane's facilities that night. 47 lives handed a second chance. When it was over, Dominic turned back to Ivy and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight as if she might vanish if he let go for even a second. "I thought I lost you." His voice broke, trembling, nothing like the cold kingpin the world knew. Ivy wrapped her arms around him, pressing her face to his chest, feeling his heart pounding like it was trying to tear free. "You found me. Again. You always find me." Outside the warehouse window, dawn began to lighten, the first rays of sun cutting through the night like a promise of a new day. The war was over, and for the first time in her life, Ivy knew she was truly free. 3 months after that horrific night, the trial of Vincent Crane took place at the federal courthouse in Chicago, becoming the largest human trafficking case in the city's history and drawing media attention from across the country. Ivy sat in the witness box with her back straight and her chin lifted, nothing like the trembling woman Dominic had found in a dark alley 8 months earlier. She no longer wore the black cloth over her eyes. Instead, she wore elegant sunglasses, a symbol of the confidence she had fought her way back to. When it was her turn to testify, Vincent's defense attorney rose with a smug expression, certain he could easily dismantle the statement of a blind woman. "How could you identify my client?" he asked. "You are blind." The courtroom fell silent, waiting for her answer, and Ivy did not waver. "I cannot see his face," she said, "but I know his voice. I heard that voice every day for 5 years telling me I was useless. I heard that voice when he burned the first letter of his name into my flesh. I will never forget that voice. Never." Her words rang clear and steady through the room, each one like a blade cutting straight through the polished mask Vincent had spent years building, and the silence that followed was so heavy that even the judge paused for a moment, as if needing to gather himself under the weight of what she had said. And for the first time since the trial began, Vincent Crane lost control. He sprang up from the defendant's table, his face flushed a dark, furious purple, and he screamed in a crazed voice that everyone in the courtroom could hear. "She is lying. She is mine." The judge slammed the gavel down, his stern command cracking through the air. "Remove the defendant." 2 court officers seized Vincent at once, dragging him out as he kept shouting until the courtroom doors closed behind him, and in that moment everyone knew he was guilty. No more proof needed. The verdict held no surprises. Vincent Crane was sentenced to life in prison without parole for human trafficking, kidnapping, assault, and countless other crimes. The trafficking network he had built over 20 years was shattered completely, and justice was finally carried out. 6 months after the trial, on a peaceful night of a full moon, Dominic led Ivy onto the balcony of the estate where they often sat beneath the stars, even though she could not see them. He had been preparing for this moment for weeks, yet standing in front of her his heart still raced like a young man confessing love for the first time. He knelt before her, took her hand in his, and began to speak in a trembling voice. "I am not a good man. I have done many terrible things in my life, but you make me want to be better." He stopped, drew a deep breath to find the courage for what came next. "Marry me, Ivy. Not because I saved you, because you saved me." Tears slid down Ivy's cheeks, but they were tears of happiness, the kind she once believed she would never be allowed to cry. She nodded, her voice thick with emotion and bright with joy. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." At that exact moment, the sound of hurried footsteps burst out, and Luna came flying from her hiding place behind the door, her face radiant like sunlight. "Finally," she exclaimed, "I have been waiting forever." Dominic laughed, a real laugh from the depths of him that he had not had in years. Then he rose, one arm around Ivy and the other pulling Luna into them, and the 3 of them held each other under the silver moonlight. A family, not by blood but by choice, not by obligation but by love. And in that moment, beneath a sky scattered with stars, all 3 knew they had found where they belonged. 1 year after the moonlit proposal, the Blackwell estate was dressed in breathtaking splendor with thousands of white and blush-pink flowers, as if the entire garden had chosen to bloom just to welcome the most important day of Ivy and Dominic's life. Guests filled the neatly arranged rows of chairs beneath an archway of fresh blossoms, and the late afternoon sun filtered through the leaves, scattering shimmering bands of light that felt like a fairy tale made real. Luna stood beside Ivy as maid of honor, a 10-year-old in a sweet pastel pink dress who would not stop whispering descriptions of everything to the mother she had chosen with her whole heart. "Mom, your dress is like moonlight, white and sparkling and so beautiful. And Dad is crying. He is really crying." Dominic stood at the end of the aisle, eyes reddened though he fought to keep his face composed, and when Ivy reached him to the sound of gentle music, his heart felt as if it might burst with happiness. When they shared their first kiss as husband and wife, Dominic leaned close and whispered into her ear, his voice thick with emotion and filled with all the love he had. "I see you. I have always seen you." Ivy smiled, tears of joy sliding down her cheeks. "And I see you too," she whispered back, "in all the ways that matter most." 3 years after the wedding, the life of the Blackwell family had transformed in ways no one could have imagined. Dominic had left the underworld behind, shifting all of his work onto a legal path, building a real estate and investment empire that no longer needed violence or spilled blood. And he told Ivy he wanted their children to grow up without ever feeling ashamed of their father, and she knew it was the truest promise he had ever made. Ivy opened a music school for children with disabilities, naming it the Blackwell Music Academy, a place where children who were blind, deaf, or living with other challenges could find joy and self-worth through music. And she taught them that disability was not a barrier, that darkness did not mean the end, that every person could shine in their own way. Luna was 13 now, growing into a bright, compassionate young girl, and she started a blog called My Blind Superhero Mom, sharing daily life with Ivy and inspiring thousands of readers around the world. But the biggest news came that spring, when Ivy announced she was pregnant with their first child. On a warm evening, the family gathered around the piano in the living room, the instrument that had witnessed so many of their most important moments. Ivy sat down, her soft fingers gliding over the keys, and began to play a piece she had composed herself called Finding Home. The melody rose and fell, sometimes gentle as a breath, sometimes powerful as ocean waves, telling the story of a lost soul who finally found where she belonged. Luna sat beside her and began to sing along, her clear voice ringing like bells, blending perfectly with her mother's playing. Dominic sat behind them, one hand resting softly on Ivy's pregnant belly, feeling the baby's little kicks, as if the child was keeping time with the music too. And in that perfect moment, Ivy smiled and silently thought about the journey that had carried her here. People often ask me, is it scary to live in darkness? And I tell them the darkness is not what is frightening. What is frightening is standing in the light and still feeling invisible. I lived 27 years in darkness, and no one truly saw me. Then one rainy night, the most dangerous man in Chicago stopped his car in a dark alley, and for the first time in my life, I was seen. Sometimes the deepest wounds lead us to the greatest blessings. Sometimes the darkest storms carry us to the brightest dawns. Sometimes being shattered is the only way the light can get in. And sometimes the family we find in the rain, the ones who choose to stay when everything falls apart, is more precious than anything we ever dreamed. That alley where he found me, we still drive past it sometimes. Dominic always squeezes my hand when we do. That is where everything changed. He tells me, that is where your real life began. I answer, and Luna always adds from the back seat, and that is where Dad proved heroes do not need capes. They just need to stop when someone needs them. The kid is right. That is exactly what love looks like. Not grand gestures, not fairy tales, just choosing each other. Every day, no matter what happens. And that is what we will do for the rest of our lives. Ivy and Dominic's story teaches us that love can come from the most unexpected places. That even hearts we thought were dead can beat again. That family is not always blood, but sometimes the people we choose and the people who choose us. It reminds us never to judge anyone by appearances or circumstances, because inside every person there is a story, a pain, and an infinite capacity to love. Friends, if this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that love can be found in the most unexpected places, do not just watch and leave. Please press the subscribe button and join our family. Please hit like and share this story with anyone who needs to believe in a second chance in life. How did this story make you feel? Did it make you think of someone in your real life? Leave a comment and share what you feel from deep in your heart. We truly want to hear your thoughts. And remember, sometimes the people who seem the most broken become the greatest blessing in our lives. We wish all of you watching this video good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and happiness. Thank you for being with us for today's story. Goodbye, and see you in the next video.